Something exciting is happening. Many Jews today feel the need for a revitalized Judaism. People are searching for a more vital and authentic mode of Jewish expression, and more than ever we need to shift not only physically but spiritually out of exile mode. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
Does an halachically observant Jew have to believe in demons and evil spirits?
If we look around us at the world of Torah observant Jews today, we see clearly that there are people who believe in these concepts, demons, evil spirits, or shall we say negative spiritual forces that exist in the world. And there are also people, halachically observant Jews in every way, who reject these ideas and these beliefs. We can find rabbis who accept these ideas and believe in them and teach them to their students even that these things are real and exist. And there are other rabbis who reject these ideas and discount them and tell their students not to believe in them. So yes, it is a very valid question, and it's clear why many people might be a little bit confused as to whether Judaism requires that a person believe in such ideas. If we look at the world of Torah literature through the ages, if we take, for example, works based on Kabbalah, etc., Jewish mysticism, we can find many references in that kind of literature to demons, evil spirits, negative spiritual influences that can attach themselves to a person or an object in certain circumstances. There is no lack of such discussion, there's no lack of documentation for such beliefs and such ideas. On the other hand, if we take the works of certain more rationalist thinkers and authorities in the Jewish world throughout history, we could mention Rabbi Gaon and the Rambam and many others, we find that they rejected these ideas completely. They said that people who believe in such things are fools. They did not accept demons, evil spirits, negative spiritual influences that exist and that attach themselves or to people or to attack or try and cause harm to people. These ideas were totally rejected by such sages. So we have before us a fact. The fact is that in the Jewish world, throughout history, there have been more. There have been different views. There has been more than one view on this subject. It's entirely true that one could point to many instances throughout history, from the time of the Tanakh, the time of the Bible, and through the period of the Second Temple, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the time of the Gaonim, medieval times, and down to the present day. One could point to many instances. In fact, we even have archaeological finds that were found in places like the Golan, for example, from the 8th century, which clearly show that Jews who lived in those places at that time, some Jews at least, definitely believed in these things. We have found there, for example, amulets with special incantations, etc., to drive away evil spirits, that sort of thing. So yes, there were definitely Jews throughout history who believed, who accepted these things, just as there were many who did not. I think it is clear and obvious that today, many, if not most, if not the vast majority of intelligent, educated people today find it very difficult, if not impossible, to believe in spirits, evil spirits and demons and the like. And in this regard, I would say that those writers, those sages such as Rabbi Gaon and the Rambam and many others who followed in their footsteps, in many ways they were ahead of their time, and they adopted a position which today is much more in concert with that which is commonly understood and appreciated as being a reasonable and informed opinion. So it is definitely not true to claim that an Orthodox Jew must believe in evil spirits or in demons.
Isn't it true that demons and evil spirits are not infrequently mentioned in the Talmud.
It is true that if when saying the Talmud, one refers to the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, it is true that one finds there, not infrequently, many references to Shedim, to demons, and different kinds of spirits and magical incantations, or the possibility that in such a situation one may be leaving oneself open to having a spell, a magic spell cast on one by a person adept at such things. There are such mentions and there are such ideas in the Talmud Bavli. It's also true that if one looks at the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem or Eretz Yisrael Talmud, one finds almost no mention of these ideas. Demons almost are unknown in the Talmud Yerushalmi. They not come up for discussion, certainly not something which we find frequently. And the same is true of many other aspects that we mentioned, magic, spells, and the like. So it seems that also in ancient times there were different opinions and different schools of thought on this matter. My impression is that the belief in such things was much more firmly rooted and much more widespread in Bavel, in Babylon and Persia and the surrounding areas. It's well known historically that ancient Babylon and Persia were considered centers of the occult, of magic and the like, and such beliefs were very common in those parts of the world. And I can tell you that even down to the present day, there are many Jews who hail from those parts, from those countries, who still harbor such beliefs. I was just recently told by a student of mine who comes from a family, both his parents come from Persia, and he mentioned that his grandmother, he knows for a fact that his grandmother, who came from Persia, till very recently, that is to say, till recent times, before she would throw water onto the floor to wash the floor, she would cry out in the vernacular of Persian Jews, she would cry out the word caution, or be careful, be aware. In order to, and he asked what was this all about, and he was told in order that the Shedim, the demons that were understood, that were conceived to exist and live on the floor of a house, would know that they should get out of the way so the water would not harm them, and so they won't get angry and therefore not harm the people in the house. This just shows you how common some of these beliefs were down to the present day. And the fact that this person who told me this very recently comes from a family that stems from Persia, from Iran today, is not surprising, because that part of the world was always associated with such beliefs. And I believe that in the time of Hazal there were probably many, even of the Chachamim, who accepted some of these beliefs, if not all of them. And there were also, I think, many who did not. And I think in Eretz Yisrael, my impression is that in Eretz Yisrael these views, these ideas were much less frequently subscribed to by the Chachamim and their students. The common people who were more likely to follow the beliefs and tales and stories of the common folk who surrounded them, the Gentile population, were probably more likely, by and large, to believe in such things, and the more learned were probably less likely to. But in Bavel, apparently, there was a phenomenon, even amongst many of the sages, who accepted many of these commonly held beliefs because they were considered to be simply facts and realities, scientific facts, just as till rather recently all people on earth believed in, for example, spontaneous generation, that if one placed meat in a container and closed it, maggots and the like would form from within the meat itself, spontaneous generation. This was only disproved in relatively recent times, and it was held to be a scientific truth. In the same way, the existence of demons or spirits and different kinds of forces, etc., were considered to be realities, and it should not surprise us that many Jews in different parts of the world, in different periods of history, subscribe to such ideas.
Doesn't the Shulchan Aruch say that one has to wash one's hands in the morning due to a negative spiritual force that remains upon awakening?
It is entirely true that the Shulchan Aruch, basing himself on the Tur, at the beginning of Bar-Hayim Siman Daled, does write this. And this is a very interesting point in case, because this idea is based on the words of the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, the Talmud Bavli, and there we find that Rashi explains the statement in the Talmud to be referring to ruach ra'ah, that is to say, some kind of evil spirit or negative spiritual force that remains on one's hands when one awakes in the morning, and in order to rid one's self or one's hands of this evil negative force, one has to pour water on one's hands 3 times. So explains Rashi. This same idea can be found in the Zohar, and this is what we find in the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch. It's also important to point out that according to Rabbeinu Hananel, who preceded Rashi, basing himself obviously on an ancient tradition, it's generally accepted that Rabbeinu Hananel had very ancient traditions from the time of the Geonim and before. Rabbeinu Hananel explains that statement in the Talmud about the what's called a Bath Melech, or a Bath Horin, in other words, as a kind of evil spirit or spiritual power which is potentially harmful. Rabbeinu Hananel explains that it refers to some kind of force or energy, negative energy that exists on the eyelids, on the eyes, not on the hands at all. It has nothing to do with the hands. It has to do with the eyes, and therefore when it says that one has to wash 3 times to remove it, according to Rabbeinu Hananel, it's referring to washing one's face or one's eyes, one's eyelids 3 times, and not referring at all to the hands. So that the statement in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch referring to washing one's hands 3 times is based on one interpretation, one understanding of the words of the Talmud Bavli, but not at all is it in keeping with the other interpretation of that very same statement. And if you ask which of those 2 interpretations is the most likely, then I would tell you that if it's impossible to say perhaps with certainty, but if one looks at the Gemara, the text of the Talmud immediately after that statement, which is on Daf Chof Tet Amud Aleph 109a in Masechet Shabbat, one finds that it is explicitly talking about the eyes, because immediately it says that if one has this problem, this harm was caused to one's eyes because of this negative force, it can be removed by placing a kind of eyeshadow or cosmetic for the eye on the eyelid. If we're discussing the hands, it's very unclear how eyeshadow or cosmetics for the eyes could help in any way. So that interpretation certainly seems more reasonable. At any rate, it's a fact that it is not at all clear that what is stated in the Gemara, in the Talmud Masechet Shabbat, regarding this evil or negative force, it's not at all clear that it's referring to the hands. As Rashi explains, it could well be referring to the eyes. That's one point that needs to be made regarding that statement in the Talmud, for example. Another fact that has to be pointed out is that in all the Geonim and many of the Rishonim, this statement is not quoted at all as having any halachic significance. For example, if one looks at the Rif and the Rosh and other Posekim, and one looks at the Geonim who quote all the halachic material before and after this discussion, one sees that they deliberately ignored and omitted to discuss this topic at all. This is also true of the Rambam, of course. You will not find any reference to having to wash one's hands specifically 3 times in the morning for this reason or that reason. Rambam discusses washing one's hands as an obligation, once is enough, before eating bread or before tefillah, before prayer, before reading Kriyat Shema, etc. That is an obligation, and that is agreed to essentially by all. But that statement in the Talmud, to which the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur refer, is not mentioned by the Rambam at all. And this leads us to posit the question, why did these Chachamim, why did the Rif and the Rosh and the Rambam, etc., why did they not mention this statement And this idea that appears in the Gemara, by the way, it should be mentioned, this idea is mentioned in the name of either Rabbi Nathan or Rabbi Yosef, depending on the reading. There are various readings. The printed version says Rabbi Nathan, many manuscripts say Rabbi Yosef. If it is in fact Rabbi Nathan who made this statement about this negative spiritual force which resides either on the hands or on the eyes, depending on the interpretation that one accepts, that is interesting if it's Rabbi Nathan, because Rabbi Nathan was Rabbi Nathan HaBavli, he was from Bavel. And it's possible this was a belief, an idea that he brought with him to Eretz Israel, that he knew from his early days, the earlier part of his life, where he grew up in Bavel. And as we said, these ideas were more prevalent in Bavel than in Eretz Israel. On the other hand, according to the other reading, it's Rabbi Yosef, so really we can't prove anything from that. Either way, it is quoted in the name of a Tana, so you would one should ask the question, why is this not mentioned? There are only really two possible answers to that question, I believe. One is that these halachic authorities, such as the Rif, the Rosh, the Rambam, etc., did not mention this idea because they felt that it is based on a superstition, an idea which is not an essential or core idea, an acceptable or orthodox idea, shall we say, in Judaism, not something one has to believe in at all. It's a belief that some people may have had, but it's not at all binding. It's not normative Jewish practice, and therefore it's not halachically binding, and therefore it does not need to be discussed. That's one possible explanation. The other explanation is that they accepted, in the case of the Rambam, you certainly do not accept, but in the case of the Rif or the Rosh, who do not express their views regarding these matters as the Rambam did, here we could ask ourselves the question, why did the Rif not mention it? Why did the Rosh not mention it? Here the explanation could be that they felt that this was a kind of midat hasidut. In other words, there is such a thing, but it's not something which a regular Jew has to be concerned with. Someone who's particularly pious or particularly careful about such things and takes such things into account and is concerned about such things is advised to do such and such, but this is a midat hasidut, it's not a halacha. And in case someone finds this explanation somewhat far-fetched or unlikely, I can tell you that just recently I saw that the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordivero, in his Perush Or Yakar on the Zohar, and Rabbi Moshe Cordivero was one of the greatest Mekubalim of all time, he writes explicitly that the notion of washing one's hands in the morning for these reasons is a midat hasiduth. So it is not an unlikely suggestion that I'm making here. In conclusion, I would mention something that I heard once in the name of a wise man who said that the Talmud Bavli contains the Torah Sheba'al Peh, or much of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, but not everything in the Talmud Bavli is Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Berkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.